Let me just set out a couple of things by way of parameters, though, before we start. One of which is to do with culture, and then one of which is to do with life stages. Firstly, we should acknowledge that different cultures approach time or think about time quite differently. I've learned some new words this week, which I've put on the kind of the outline there. There are three main types of cultures when it comes to thinking about time. The first of which is monochronic cultures, such as British culture, Western culture. Monochronic cultures tend to view time and understand time as linear, in the sense that you could draw a timeline, for example, that moves from past, present, future. And if you want to think about it another way, in a monochronic culture, time is a little bit like a conveyor belt, one of those moving walkways that you get at the airport. That inevitably, you are always just moving forward. And because time works that way, in monochronic cultures, time is often viewed as a commodity. So time can be saved, time has to be managed, time can be wasted. In monochronic cultures, time can be compartmentalised as well. It can be broken down into blocks quite easily. So that is the way that British culture works, and I imagine for many of us, it's the way that our minds work, it's the way that we've always worked. But you also have, very commonly, in fact, statistically, it's probably the case that more people in the world live in polychronic cultures than live in monochronic cultures. And in a polychronic culture, which I guess it means kind of many times, there's a much more flexible approach to time. Time is viewed, in one sense, much more malleably. It doesn't need to be compartmentalised and set aside for a particular purpose. Time can be used for multiple things simultaneously. And often in a polychronic culture, relationships, or what is seen as most important, takes priority when it comes to what you do with your time. Rather than time being kind of allocated to a particular thing and then that taking the priority. So just to try and kind of give us an example about that. In a polychronic culture, if you were going somewhere to do something, but you bumped into your friend on the way, the fact that you bumped into your friend is much more significant than the fact that you were going somewhere to do something. And so you don't think, but I've got to go and... If you're from a monochronic culture, at that point you're thinking, well, it's nice that I bumped into my friend, but I'm sorry I can't stop to chat because I've got to go and do this thing that is what is kind of booked in my diary for what I'm doing at that point in time. In a polychronic culture, the value doesn't work like that. Time is more flexible, time is more malleable, and therefore you prioritise what's more important, which is generally relationships, people. So you stop and chat to your friend. Just to give us another example about the way this might work slightly differently in practice, I used to work with a guy who was from Nigeria, and we were talking about this kind of thing once, and I sort of said, how does it work with your church in Nigeria when it comes to what time people get there and those kind of things? Because he was saying he has a much kind of looser view of meeting appointments. It was a bit of an adjustment for him when he moved here, that the expectation was, if this is the time the meeting starts, you've got to be there for that. And he said, well, my church in Nigeria, on a Sunday, it runs for about 5 hours. And there's not so much a defined start time and ending time. There's just the kind of a time when church is happening. So people kind of come and go. And you can see why in that sort of situation, if you were on your way to church but you bumped into your friend, then, okay, well, I can actually stop and have a cup of coffee with my friend for half an hour and then go to church. Because it doesn't really so much matter. Because church hasn't been apportioned in the way that we think about it. Well, no, it starts at 9 o'clock and it finishes at 10:15. Things are just much looser. In polychronic cultures, people tend to have much less, in one sense, allocated in their diary. There are fewer things that have to happen on a particular day because there are many things that might happen. People that I could see. conversations I might decide I need to have, and so on. So it's a little bit more flexible. It's worth us thinking about this, I think, though, just to bear in mind that the Bible is mostly written in a polychronic cultural context, more so than a monochronic one. So in some ways, when the Bible talks about time, or when there are things that sometimes we might read in the Bible, we think, I find it hard to work out exactly what's going on here. This is sometimes the explanation. I'll give you an example of that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, there's an issue about the Lord's Supper. Paul is basically kind of reproaching the church in Corinth for how they practice the Lord's Supper. And he talks about the fact that some of you, have already finished the Lord's Supper before some of you arrive. Some of you are drunk, and then others have got nothing to eat. And we read that and we go, what on earth is happening here? How can that possibly be? Because we think, the Lord's Supper starts at the end of the service, which started at 9 o'clock and finishes about 5 minutes later. And so it's very hard to imagine. Whereas, if you're in a polychronic culture and the Lord's Supper is, in that sense, a much more flexible, ongoing event to which people come and go, then you can see why those kind of issues arise. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. Some of you may come from polychronic cultures, or may have families that function much more in those kind of ways, so you'd be better placed than I am to explain some of the nuances of that. The other type of culture is slightly rarer, the cyclical culture. They're often in places that are more agrarian, so more agricultural, less industrialised. Like agricultural farming. Which views time less in terms of a linear progression and more in terms of cyclical patterns. So more kind of things that come and go and then come back again. So rather than time moving from past to present to future, this is what happened last year, this is what will happen next year. In one sense, everything just repeats. So another slightly different way of thinking about it. Now, we live in a monochronic culture. We live in a Western culture. For many of us, for most of us, that will be natural and normal to us. And I think if you live in a monochronic culture, it is quite difficult in some ways to imagine how life works in other cultures. It's so ingrained in how we function that it's almost difficult to think how it could be otherwise. And I'm aware that that is true for me. Monochronic culture is all I know when it comes to time, and therefore all I can speak into. So that's what we're going to kind of assume in terms of application, but I'm just conscious that may not be the case for all of us. And as I say, we just need to be conscious as well that the Bible doesn't assume. The Bible isn't written to people in 21st century Britain, first and foremost, and therefore the original context wouldn't always be like ours when it comes to time. And the second thing to say, just in terms of parameters, is that our feelings about time, our experience of time, changes as we go through life. The stage we're at in life will have a material impact on the amount of time that we have, or the variety and nature of the different pulls on our time, the different time pressures that we experience. And the experience of time is very different from a primary school child to somebody who's retired. Whether we're students, whether we're working, whether we're parents of young children, whether we're parents of children who've left home, whether we're empty nesters, whether we're married, whether we're single, whether we're retired, all those things will have a big impact on our schedule, on what our time looks like. And so again, you'll just have to think about kind of how some of the big principles that we're going to look at apply. I think that the big principles we're going to look at and think about this evening apply regardless. Some of the examples we might use might be a little bit more specific, but just bear that in mind. I'm conscious that people's circumstances are different, but I think all the principles apply regardless, in one sense, of what stage of life we're at. Time is one of the few resources that gets distributed with perfect equality. It doesn't matter who you are, or where you are, or how rich or poor you are, we all get 24 hours a day, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year. And this fact presses upon us, the fact that we only have so much time, because it can often feel like there is so much that we need to do, or so much that we would like to do. The thought of all the things that we could do, and the way that in one sense kind of presses in upon us, is reflected, I think, by the teacher, who is probably Solomon, the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, which is one of the great wisdom books of the Bible. And somebody happy to read for us verses 1 to 8 of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, here on page 671. Thank you, Anne.
There is a time for everything. I might stop singing.
Yeah.
A season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace.
Thank you, Anne. Some translations also, I think, have a time to sing and a time to just read.
I'm just trying to remember who wrote that song.
The Birds.
Who was it?
The Birds.
What was it?
I think so.
Yeah. It's going to be in my head.
It's the only song that top charts that is basically just Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Birds didn't write it originally,
Oh,
No.
yeah.
but it was out of copyright by then. So. I think as a kind of poetic reflection on time, it is absolutely brilliant, Ecclesiastes 3, because it sort of encapsulates our experience and the pressure and the pleasure of time perfectly. For every positive there is a negative, for every bad thing there is a good. And just like our experience of life, there are so many good things that we enjoy, so many good things that we have the time and are afforded the time to do, that we get to do, the time to laugh, time to dance, the time to build. Life has so much potential, it's so exciting and wonderful, and there's a time for all that. And yet there's always the flip side. A time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. And for all the good things, our time is overshadowed, and also our time is always limited, because, as the teacher observes poignantly there in verse 2, right at the very beginning, there is a time to be born and a time to die. We must all face up to the finite nature of time as we acknowledge our own mortality. We will all die. In that way, the time pressure that we feel may change as we go through life. And we may, as we get older, have slightly fewer calls upon our time day by day, but the pressure of feeling how precious each day is, of knowing that our days are a finite supply, grows. So much of our battle with time, so much of our frustration, so much of the tension that can surround what we do and how we use our time is because we feel it running through our fingers. We sense the sands of time cascading gently and yet unstoppably through the egg timer of our lives. That's why we say things like, that's 2 hours I'll never get back, when we watch a bad movie. We talk about wasted days when we've sat on hold trying to get that appointment for hours. Because we know our days aren't limitless. And we know that even for all good things come to an end, including life itself. James chapter 4, verse 14. You don't need to turn to that one. What is your life? It is a mist that appears for a time and then vanishes. And it is just important that we acknowledge that. The Bible is not shy about making us aware of our own mortality. The other week here at Friday Club we had some coloured sand out in the car park for a craft. And we get this coloured sand and the kids get kind of prick sticks and prick stick on paper and then pour the sand on to make these kind of sand art pictures. But one of the kids was just throwing it around. They just got hold of a couple of packets and they were just spinning around, just launching the sand everywhere. And I asked them to stop it. I said, stop doing that, you're wasting the sand. Doesn't matter, they said, you can just get some more. And that is often kids' attitude, isn't it? There'll just always be more. Go to Amazon. Just tap your card. There'll always be more. And some people, maybe especially when we're younger, approach life that way, as if there will always be more. As if time isn't a precious resource. But if we're to use our time wisely and well, we need to acknowledge that it is limited. Time is limited, and as we think about using our time, we need to acknowledge that we are limited too. Again, the Bible reminds us repeatedly in a variety of ways of that fact. A couple of years ago we studied the book of Exodus, and in Midweek again, you don't need to turn to it, in Exodus chapter 18, the people have come out of Egypt, and Moses is trying to kind of help solve all the problems. And in Exodus 18, Moses is, we're told, has a queue of people lining up to see him from morning until night. He's to spend all day trying to fix all the problems that the people have. And his father-in-law comes along and says, Moses, you can't do it. You can't do it all yourself. You need to delegate. You need to get other people to do this. Moses is limited. He cannot do everything. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul is writing to the Corinthians about basically kind of relationships, deciding whether to get married or not. And he talks about the fact that if you get married, you're not making a bad decision. That's a good thing to do. Good to get married if you want to. But he says you've got to realise if you get married, there'll be less time. Less you'll be able to do. You can't be, he talks about being kind of wholly devoted to the Lord in the same way, as in you can't just kind of volunteer for everything. You can't sign up to be on every rota. You can't use all your hours just to do things for the Lord, in that sense, because you've got to do things for your husband. You've got to do things for your wife. You can't do everything. Your time will be divided in that way. Our time is limited, and so are our resources of energy and patience and concentration. And really, that's what lies behind the biblical principle of rest, the Sabbath principle. And that reference there in Mark 2, that's Jesus talking about the Sabbath and explaining to the people that man wasn't made for the Sabbath was made for man. God knows that you need rest, that you can't do everything. Your kind of physical resources, your emotional resources are not limitless. And so sometimes you need to stop. You can't do everything. And we know that that's true of human beings because it was even true of Jesus in his humanity. Jesus couldn't do everything. On more than one occasion in the Gospels, like in Mark 1 there, or we even saw it earlier in Matthew chapter 8, a couple of weeks ago, the disciples come to him and say, Jesus, there's loads of people, there's crowds of people here who need you. And Jesus says, no, I can't. We've got to go somewhere else. He withdraws to pray. In his humanity, he's just one person. He can't do everything. We're limited. And God knows that, and God doesn't expect us to do everything. Just turn up Mark 14. on page 1020. This is the account of Jesus on his way to Jerusalem, just before he comes to Jerusalem for his arrest and trial and crucifixion. And he's anointed by the woman in Bethany, the woman who brings the kind of very expensive jar of perfume and breaks it and anoints Jesus' head with it. And the people are very annoyed because they say it's very expensive, surely we could have done something more useful with that money. But Jesus says, well, somebody have to read from verse 6 for us, down to end of verse 9.
I can read.
Thanks, Jack.
Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you always have with you, but you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her.
Brilliant, thank you. Those 5 words at the start of verse 8 I think are really precious. I was once at a church staff training day at the start of a new academic year, and a very wise old minister came and spoke to us, and basically spoke to us for about an hour and a half just on those words. She did what she could. His point was, God doesn't call us or expect us to do, in one sense, more than we are able. He doesn't call us to be superheroes. He calls us to do what we can. Knowing our limitations, it's very easy to think all the time about the big long list of things that we might be doing, things that would be good things to be doing, things that we think, oh, I should be doing that, I should be doing that. There'll be always more. Jesus commends the woman because she did what she could. And that is what we're called to do. And for some of us, as we think about our time, this may be just what we need to hear today. This may be the main thing that we need to take away. If we feel burdened by either our lack of time because we're so busy, or we feel burdened by our own limitations, our lack of energy or emotional resources, or whatever it happens to be, we feel conscious of all the things that we're not doing, all the things that we don't do, that we feel like I should be doing, the good things we'd like to be doing more of, the people we'd like to see more frequently, the more people we'd like to see, the ways in which we'd like to be more involved at home, or the ways in which we feel like we let people down at work because we can't do it all. And God knows that. God doesn't call us to. He calls us to do what we're able to, what we can. And acknowledging that our time, we are limited, isn't easy. Our pride can make us want to be all things to all people all the time. But we can't. It's just not possible. And so acknowledging, as God reminds us in various different ways and at various different points in his word, that our time is limited and that we are limited, can actually be very, very liberating. So that's the first thing that we need to see. Our time is limited. And knowing that our time is limited is a key first step in considering carefully how we want to use, therefore, the time and the energy, the kind of resource that we have. And that brings us to our second kind of major principle. Our time is the Lord's. Realising our time is limited, it helps us to see that we need to be deliberate about how we use it. And we need to give it some thought, I think, so that we kind of set some priorities. And that might sound obvious, but it's not easy. it's not easy in part because it's generally something as a society that we are pretty bad at. We live in a culture, in the Western world generally, and I think probably particularly in a place like London, we live in a city that values busyness, is impressed by busyness, but which is distracted and preoccupied, which struggles to focus, struggles to do well what matters most, because so much of the time it's just rushing around, bouncing from one thing to the next. And we have more convenience, we have more opportunity than at almost any point in history. Our homes are more comfortable, our lives are healthier and longer. We're able to function 24 hours a day. If you go back 100 years, it was very hard to be busy once the sun went down because you couldn't really see once you were functioning by candlelight. Whereas now we can do all things at any point. We're able to travel more affordably than ever before. We can be informed about things happening anywhere in the world instantly at the touch of a button. We can get our shopping and our meals brought to our doors in a matter of minutes. We can be entertained in an absolute myriad of ways. We can pursue almost limitless interests. We can communicate with anyone, anywhere, with astonishing ease. And yet that growth in convenience and opportunity has translated into an extraordinary growth in the complexity of life. And therefore, in many cases, either an almost overwhelming busyness or a palpable sense of missing out, kind of crushing feeling there's always something else that I could be doing, should be doing, that I ought to be doing, something else that I'd be enjoying more if I were doing that instead of what I am doing. We are often, in that sense, many of us, using our time in some ways just desperately kind of flailing around, paddling, trying to stay afloat. And yet such connectivity and convenience has also, bizarrely maybe, afforded the opportunity for some to almost withdraw from society, to become more reclusive, and to feel that we don't really need to do very much at all. And that's been particularly pronounced since the pandemic, particularly pronounced, it seems, in kind of younger generations, in the Gen Zers, the late teens, people in their early 20s in the past few years, particularly amongst men. Kind of an alarming growth in the what people refer to as the economically inactive, and people who don't really seem to be doing very much at all. Too much time or too little. You need to know yourself. Which side of the horse are you more likely to topple off? A temptation to kind of outrageous busyness, or a temptation to kind of withdraw. But wherever we think we fall on that spectrum, really, I just want to kind of gently challenge us as to whether our priorities, how we think about allocating and utilising our time, reflects the fact that the time we have is not our own, but is a gift from God. And so we ought to use it accordingly. The psalmist in Psalm 90, again you don't need to turn to it, it's just a one verse, puts it this way: teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days, God. Teach us to recognise that our time is limited, and therefore to be conscious of that we may gain a heart of wisdom, that we may use our days wisely by using them as God would have us. And Paul warns the Ephesians to make good use of their time in Ephesians 5. Be very careful then, he says, how you live, not as unwise but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Now, I'm not going to give us a kind of ordered list of priorities. I know some people like to do that, and I think you can probably biblically make a case for some kind of list of priorities, but I think it's easy to over-egg that and to be kind of slightly more rigid about that than I think is necessary. I'm not going to give us a set of time management tools or kind of things like that. I think there's something to be said for being organised and trying to be kind of disciplined and thought through about how we use our time. but that is not for today. But in very broad brush terms, the Bible does teach us what sort of things God wants us to use our time for by telling us what God thinks is important. Therefore, it teaches us that we have a joyful Christian duty to serve our families, both our biological families at home and our spiritual family at church. It does tell us that we have a duty to work hard and to earn a living so that we're not an unnecessary burden on others, to love our neighbours. It tells us that we need to rest and things like that. So there's no getting away from the fact that there are lots of good, valuable things that we can be doing, and we'll need to work out how we do them in proportion to one another. But God gives us freedom in that. And if you flip to the back of your Bibles, you won't find an Appendix A with a spreadsheet outlining how you ought to divide your time up. And we think these things through in freedom. But remembering, as we said earlier, that we can't do everything. Which means that we can say no to some things without a guilty conscience. And there will be good causes that we can't really get behind. And there will be some people that we lose touch with, or we just can't invest lots of time getting to know. And there will be some kind of good, worthy opportunities that we could volunteer, things that we could sign up for. And that because our time is limited and we are limited, it simply won't be possible for us to do. Remember, Jesus couldn't do everything. Sometimes Jesus said no. And you and I aren't Jesus. Thanks, Sonia. And it may well be that we're just not best placed to figure these things out by ourselves. But Jesus can help us. Matthew 11:28, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I'm not sure that's necessarily talking just about physical weariness, but it may include that. And also just the feeling of weariness, being heavy laden, because we feel overstretched, or we're just not quite sure what the best things to do with our time are. Well, what a great thing to bring to Jesus and pray about. What a great thing to talk to others about as well. But one thing that we must do, I think, and the thing that will hold everything else together, like the kind of the ring in the binder, is we must make time to spend with Jesus. So if you want to turn to Luke chapter 10, we're on page 1042. And if somebody's happy to read for us Luke 10 verses 38 to 42. Thank you.
As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her.
Brilliant, thank you. So here comes Jesus to the home of Mary and Martha, and Martha is busy. Martha has lots of calls on her time, lots of things that need doing. And so understandably she's annoyed. She's annoyed with her sister, because her sister is not doing those things. Her sister is just using her time to sit and listen to Jesus. And Jesus kind of gently, lovingly says to Martha, no, she has chosen what is better. Few things are needed, or indeed only one. We must make time to be with Jesus, to, as it were, sit at Jesus' feet and listen to him. There might be a variety of ways that we do that. It might be that we do that when we're sitting at our table in the morning, opening our Bible and reading and saying our prayers. It might be as we pray and meditate as we walk, or as we do it on the commute. It might be as we gather and we do it in Bible study each week, or as we do it at church. There's no kind of single, this means one thing to talk about sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to him. But regardless of all the other pressures, making sure that we are prioritising and carving out times during our days, during our weeks, individually and corporately, and to listen to Jesus, to listen to God speak to us in his word, is absolutely vital. And sadly, that's the thing that so often gets squeezed out. That's what I find personally, certainly when it comes to my own kind of personal Bible reading, because in one sense it's so flexible. It doesn't necessarily occupy a slot in the diary in the same way. It can often feel like, there's always something else that needs to be done. And so what began with good intentions to, I'll do 15 minutes every day, all of a sudden becomes 30 seconds, becomes, sorry, I haven't read my Bible today, but please help me. It's so easy for it to get pushed out. I think we see that when it comes to, I'm conscious I'm preaching to the choir here, because you, the guys who come to Midweek Bible studies every week and come to church regularly and things like that. But I think the fact that, in one sense, church just rolls on. Church is there every Sunday. We're here every Wednesday. And for lots of people, lots of the time, makes it easy for it to get squeezed out. I was going to probably miss it this week because it'll be there next week. I think that's been true in general of kind of church attendance patterns in the last 20 years or so. Whereas your regulars used to be there probably 3 Sundays out of 4. Now it's more like 50% of the time, because something else comes up. There's something else, there's some people we can go and see, or there's a birthday party happening, or whatever it happens to be. And it just gets pushed to the side. And what Martha is doing in those verses isn't bad. It's not that she's being distracted by terrible, worldly, ungodly things. She's doing good things. She's getting on with good stuff. It's just, Jesus says, that what Mary is doing is better. And we must always make time for the better. And doing that, again, making time individually, making time corporately, to do what Jesus lovingly instructs us to do as his people, and that will mean not doing some other things. Being a Christian, living as Christians, personally with our families, will mean there are some things that our non-Christian friends or family or colleagues do that we can't. I think, realistically, if we just try and keep up with everybody else, but add our faith stuff in on the side, I think we'll find it impossible. Because our time is limited. And so again, it will mean saying no to things that we might really want to do, that wouldn't be bad things to do, because there's something better. Because as we sit at Jesus' feet and listen to his words in the scriptures, and as by his Spirit he changes us and shapes us more into the likeness of Christ, well, so I think we'll find that Jesus' priorities are more reflected in ours, including in how we use our time. And one example of that, I think, occurs just a few chapters later in Luke. So if you want to flick forward to chapter 16, it's on page 10,049. And we won't read the whole thing, but this is the parable of the shrewd manager. Shrewd manager is a fascinating character. So he is, the guy in the parable works for his boss, but realises he's going to lose his job, and thinks, what am I going to do? I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to have enough money. How am I going to survive? But he thinks, I can use the limited time that I have left, whilst I'm still working here, to do things that will prepare me for after I'm not working here anymore. And he does that. He goes around to the clients of his boss, and he basically kind of cuts their bills, cuts deals with them, does them favours, so that by the time he's left his employment, they'll be nice to him. They'll look after him. And Jesus commends the manager. He doesn't commend him for his dishonesty. He commends him for something else. And let me read from verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now, the primary application there in what Jesus is saying is to money. He's talking about how you use your money. But I think the exact same principle applies to time. We ought to be shrewd in how we use our time by investing it in things that will last, things that will bear eternal fruit. Like the shrewd manager who realises that his time here is limited. What is he going to do now to prepare himself for the future? I think the same principle applies to us now as we think about what are we going to do with our days here on earth that will prepare us as we look forward for days to come. Things that will bear eternal fruit. And so where we can choose, and spending time with people, being involved with things that will help show and share the love of Christ, so that we have the opportunity to be built up and encourage others on in their faith, so that others have the opportunity to hear and experience those things. Well, that is in Jesus' book a good investment of our time. Because the final big principle, and just in the last couple of minutes, is that eternity is a long time. Our careers won't last forever. Our hobbies, our football teams, our homes, the stamps in our passport, these things won't last forever. The American pastor John Piper has written a book I would recommend that is uncomfortable reading. So if you're not in the market to be kind of prodded and challenged, then don't read it. It's called Don't Waste Your Life. Let me just read this from the back, kind of introducing the book. I'll tell you what a tragedy is. I will show you how to waste your life. Consider this story from the February 1998 Reader's Digest. A couple took early retirement from their jobs in the northeast of the United States 5 years ago when he was 59 and she was 51. They now live in Punta Gorda, Florida, where they cruise on their 30-foot trawler, play softball, and devote themselves to collecting shells. Picture them before Christ at the great day of judgment. Look, Lord, see my shells. That is a tragedy. The love we show to others, the ways in which we invest our time in the work of the kingdom by pointing people to Jesus, in our homes, in our workplaces, amongst our neighbours, and together as a church, those things will last. I think you could paraphrase verse 9 of Luke 16. I tell you, use your earthly time to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is over, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Because life is short now, but eternity is long. And all those things that we wish we could do in this life, all those tasks, all those interests, all those trips, all those meals, all those drinks with friends, we will have time enough. We will have time inexhaustible to do those things. I used to find it I think I shared this the other week when I was doing something in Matthew. I used to find it a real struggle. Not a kind of a total obsession, but I spent a lot of time in my head thinking about all the sporting events that I wanted to attend. For a while I was really into golf before I got married, so I got to pay with that. And I had a kind of list of all the golf courses I wanted to play, all the places I wanted to go to play golf. And it was a real kind of in a bit of a rush to do that. Instinctively, I devoted a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resource to doing those things. Before, as part of my training, really, we spent a long time thinking about the new creation, thinking about eternity, and just realising we have life forever to do those things. So don't waste this one. I think the antidote to both a kind of lethargy or apathy when it comes to how we use our time now, or an unhealthy busyness in this life, is to have a clear view of the life to come. We look forward to the promised rest that we thought about just last term, actually, when we were studying Hebrews. We studied it in chapter 4 and then in chapter 11, thinking about the people of faith, people who are prepared to give up things now in this life, prepared to use their time now doing things that they may not normally have chosen, that may not normally have been what they would have preferred, because they were looking for something else. Let me read these verses from Hebrews 11, this is from verse 13. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And then from verse 39, these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Eternity changes everything about our view of time now. Put the quote there, reflection from C.S. Lewis on the subject in Mere Christianity. Most people, if they'd really learned to look into their own hearts, would know that they do want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in this world. I mean, I think that's very perceptive. So much of our busyness, so much of the kind of frantic racing around from one thing to another is in search of something that's always out of reach. I think in search of some experience, in search of some wholeness, in search of some satisfaction. There are all sorts of things in this world that offer to give it to you, but they never quite keep their promise. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care on the one hand never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for the something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life, to press on to that other country and to help others to do the same. That's actually what the teacher of Ecclesiastes knew. We'll finish right back where we started, after the kind of a poem on time in Ecclesiastes 3. The teacher continues from verse 9, what do workers gain from their toil? I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. I'm going to stop there. We have a little bit of time. I mean, we're monochronic, so we're not going to go, it's not open-ended. For thoughts, questions, clarifications, stuff that you vehemently disagree with.
It's just interesting, that you said life is short and eternity is long. So we should be living for eternity. Because, the main message in the world is life is short. I've got to do it all now. I guess if we're not looking, if we're knowing that we've got a life after this, and that life is short.
Yeah. And you really see, it's interesting how how open that is. When you think about the kind of bucket lists and all those books, like 1001 places to visit before you die, 1001 restaurants to eat in before you die, 1001 golf courses to play in before you die, whatever your thing is. But it's exactly that. It's a kind of frantic rush to do all these things because time is really limited. Yeah, that's exactly that.
And at the Ladies' Day, I was saying that, I'm going on holiday and I just think, I'm actually only thinking about coming back. I'm dreading it. That comeback feeling, we just feel like, I just want to be on holiday again. But then I thought, because the way they were talking about eternity at the Women's Day, I just thought, right, we're going to have that forever. It's going to be amazing. And it's not going to be any comeback. Yeah. You see what I mean? If you think about it, it really is like
no come down.
Huh? Yeah, it's really, yeah.
Well, and that's what I mean about in the kind of Ecclesiastes poem. That's what I mean about the teacher's observation that all of life is overshadowed by its limitations and by the fact that every good has a kind of negative twin, if you like. Because part of the effect that has is it that overshadows the good things. Because even the good things we know won't last. So the holiday is amazing, but we know that at the end of the week we've got to come home. So that kind of finite nature of everything leads to a sense of, I don't know what the word would be, dissatisfaction or a kind of emptiness with those things. Which, if you read the whole of Ecclesiastes, is kind of constant, is in some ways one of the main underlying messages. Because if you therefore seek your satisfaction, and if you seek your meaning or your pleasure or your happiness or whatever it happens to be, in things of this world, then they will frustrate you. Because it will come to an end, because your time is finite. I mean, I think I've probably heard me say this before. I just think a prime illustration of that kind of the frustration of things being finite is, I don't know, somebody like Barack Obama. Do you think about Barack Obama, who has been one of the most significant and successful and influential people of the 21st century, and yet all that he was able to do, all that he was able to achieve, has been, recently, quite literally undone with the stroke of a pen. And you go, what is there to show for it? Because it just doesn't last. And everything's like that. And therefore, that's where I think having kind of got to set eternity in the hearts of men, that's the sort of resolution in the end, in Ecclesiastes, or even in the end, it's the resolution in chapter 3. Because it leaves you going, actually, we need something more, and that changes everything about how I see those things now.
So my mother, she never went out of the country. And she only brought up my sister and myself. She went to holidays Southend. And did she miss out on life? Did you miss out the joy of going here and there and doing all these special things? Does it matter? Does all these things really mean nothing there? It's the joys of, being together and bring up children. That's what life's all about.
Yeah, I think that's right, Brian. And I think you can try and have all the experiences. You can try and fill your life with all the things that you think will enhance your life or make your life better, and actually end up feeling like in one sense you've missed out because you've been so busy doing that you've forgotten what really matters. Now, that's not to say that those things like Lewis said, you can still appreciate those things. You know, personally, I would say, just because you guys are here, it's better to have been to Bali than not. But yeah, exactly. But to make those things the be-all and end-all, to make that's what I must do to have a fulfilled life. I think you're right. I think.
The film, The Gods Are Crazy, have you seen it?
No.
Oh, it's a fantastic film.
What's it called?
The Gods Are Crazy.
Oh, The Gods Are Crazy. Oh yeah, you have told me about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. It's where people in Africa were just living normal, you know. They didn't have any money, didn't have anything, just living with their families and, you know, and then what happened, someone threw a bottle out of the plane, and there was all rows and fights over this bottle because you use it for all different things. And so he threw it out to the gods. They came down and hit someone on the head. So he buried it. Oh, that didn't work because then someone dug it up and used it again. So he said, what can I do to the damn thing? He thought he's so much trouble. So he said, no, I'll throw it in the end of the world. The world's flat. So he walked along. There's all these people in cars and fighting each other. And what do you want it for? We're just happy together with family and the rest of it. And so he threw it over the mountain and went back to home. He didn't want to be like those gods who want bigger cars and bigger houses and bigger that. They just want to live normal. It's
Yeah, thank you, Graham.
it's
Nestle, problem.
Just as an encouragement, you were saying it's hard, and I totally agree to find time daily to do Bible readings. And certainly when I was working, I find that very hard. I used to get to work very early, but I've really enjoyed since I've been retired. I can spend, and I've been able to go through the Bible in a year since I've been retired. And yeah, that is a really great privilege. Get up, get the Bible, read it, and yes, there are days when I have to be quicker, spend a few minutes on it because I have to be somewhere, but that's something you can have to look forward to in your time.
Yeah, I noticed a while back that I could think back to times when I really felt like I was growing a lot in my faith and I was spending a lot of time in the Bible, and I realized there was a trend. I was like, oh, this is every time I was unemployed.
I agree, yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
We should pray.